Welcome. Episode 9, Watching Privacy Show. Brent, as always, substituted Raju for Annika this week. How's it going, y'all?
Good. How
Good.
are you?
Feels good representing America's team. Rams, there it is.
I have to agree with you, Tejas. We've unionized against Tejas, and we are both in our Rams gear.
I was gonna give you a compliment, Brent, about Memorial Day, and you got the hat on. I really respect it. And then you just had to call the Rams America's team, which I don't think anybody would believe in their right mind. So whatever delusional world you're living in, that is perfectly fine with me. But I think we got a lot to dive into this week, so let's get started. What's up first here? Boom. As some people might know, Worldwide Developers Conference, Apple's biggest, or not biggest, but I guess second biggest event of the year, but biggest for developers, is coming up next week. And there are rumors running around, one of them being that they're going to announce a new search engine. Rumors are rumors. Apple stuff is always under tight wraps. Well, we'll see if Siri actually gets smart. But beyond the point, I think it is kind of interesting to note. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that Apple has been working on for quite some time. In the article, there's been some in the past as well, but in 2021, Google paid Apple 15 billion with a B to be the default search engine on Apple Safari. And so I remember there used to be, I think, like this old interview with Steve Jobs about why the Google partnership kind of happened and what his philosophy was behind it. And ultimately, it was just that when someone uses an iPhone, in Steve Jobs' perspective, they expect kind of like the best experience. And at the time, Google provided the best, or still does, the best search experience, which is why you kind of have to make some sacrifices, even if he doesn't believe in, their revenue model or maybe just company philosophy. At least, the customers expect kind of the best results when they make a search, which is why they have to go with Google. I wouldn't be surprised if, everything that happens on the phone, Apple knows about as well. They probably create their own mini search engine, or even full-blown one that's tied into Safari on Macs and on iPhones and iPads. But 15 billion is not a small amount. I mean, if they've been working on this, I would imagine for a couple of years, I'm sure 15 billion is significantly more revenue than DuckDuckGo or Brave Search. And so they've got a big leg up for how much money that they could possibly save. And to put that 15 billion in context, there's about 1 billion, I believe, active iPhones. It could be more. I think that number might be from last year or so. So technically, it's about Google pays $15 to acquire a search user. And I would say that's a pretty good deal for Google because, I mean, Apple could probably charge more than 15 billion, to be honest, because generally speaking, iPhone users are what's called like a higher value advertising targets, where they'll generally buy more things, they spend more on app stores, they'll spend more on clicking on ads and buy higher ticket items. So it's generally like a more coveted demographic for advertisers to target, Google specifically. And so $15 for customer acquisition cost, not really that bad of a deal in my opinion. What did y'all think?
I think just on the surface of what you just said, that's so ludicrous to me in terms of $15 billion isn't a lot. I mean, and it really isn't when you think about it. But just the fact that we can sit here and say that and mean it, it's kind of crazy. But just imagine how much does that I mean, Apple is paying Google 15 billion. And if these rumors are true, uh they're willing to walk away from 15 billion because they're probably going to make X amount of dollars more by data that comes with it. I think I saw somewhere where there are now a billion. What's their app? The Apple search, the search. I mean, the browser. I'm
Safari.
forgetting. Was it?
Safari.
There's a billion Safari users now. So I mean that's great. It's a big accomplishment, of course, when you look at what's going on with Chrome. I think there's like 8 billion or even more. Well, wait a minute, they're not even 8 billion people in the world. Anyway, there's a lot. There's way more uh, uh, Chrome users than Safari users. But look at all that data that's at stake here. Look, if Apple is able to grab more access and have more real time data coming through Safari, why wouldn't they? So and to me, it's about the billions, but it's also about the data that will lead to even more billions down the line. And then the other thing is, I know somebody mentioned Siri in there, um, and maybe finally Siri will get some smarts. I mean, because let's face it, Siri hasn't really gotten much smarter since 2011. So it would be nice, but it's not just the voice. I mean, it's not just the text data. You have to figure eventually, mobile search is going to be a lot different than text search. There's going to be voice, more search for voice, and how does that kind of translate into monetizable data? And so, the more that you're able to use your voice assistant, the more words that are going to be included in your search, and that creates more opportunities for data to monetize and to try to keep private. I guess we ought to say that too. But in this regard, I think I would not be surprised if the rumors are true, because it's just so much opportunity for Apple to change the game at the expense of one of their big rivals. So why not?
Yeah, I guess I'm excited to see what happens on Monday because the first, they're saying it's a rumor, so I want to see if this is confirmed or denied on Monday. And I guess we'll see. It also reminds me a little bit of that Vice article we all talked about a while ago about like Facebook doesn't know what it does with your data or where it goes in like a leaked document. So when I don't know how Apple's going to handle all of this new data that it's getting, but sometimes I think these like tech companies are kind of built on like a house of cards where they don't know exactly what they're going to use all of your data for, but they are in fact collecting it, even if they don't have like an explicit purpose for it. So that makes me, nervous. Yeah, but I guess it is what it is if it does happen.
Well, I mean, speaking of collecting data, I think the next one's pretty bad too. There was this thing coming out of Europe about Vodafone, and so Vodafone's a pretty big cell phone carrier out in Europe, and they plan on introducing carrier-level user tracking for targeted ads. And this is kind of pretty much the worst thing you could imagine because we always kind of focus on cookies and kind of privacy from social media sites and things like that. But the true, I would say, purveyors of this kind of surveillance is definitely the ISPs. And so your internet service provider, either at your home or on your mobile phone, that controls or knows every single website you're accessing it, when you're accessing it, how long you're accessing it, how many times you're interacting with that website. And so and on top of that, especially for mobile, you get location data and things along those lines as well. And so for them to collect data and store it and use it, which many of them do, is something that you really can't get out of, to be honest. And so from this article, it kind of goes, Vodafone is piloting a new advertising ID system called Trust PID or Trust PID, which will work as a persistent user tracker at the mobile ISP level. The new system is in test phase in Germany and is intended to be impossible to bypass from within the web browser settings or through cookie blocking or IP address masking. So that just seems obviously not very good overall. And I mean, it's not very good. One, persistent tracker is probably a good or a bad sign because they basically know everything and maintain it throughout any kind of phone number change or anything along those lines. But given it's a mobile carrier, they have location data, so they know where you are every night, where you're sleeping, where your home is, where your work is, what places you're going to, and then it's also what websites you're accessing, what apps you have open the most, and pretty much every little thing you do being kind of controlled or collected at the ISP level. So this is a pretty bad. I thought the worst thing was that they had this quote on the article that said, consumers appreciate the idea of a free internet, but this comes with a trade-off. Publishers need a sustainable revenue model, meaning that it becomes essential to add subscription paywalls or rely on advertising to maintain free access to high quality content. That's kind of their website explanation. I think high quality is a subjective term, and so a lot of stuff might not actually be high quality that they think it is. But what did you guys think of this one? 'Cause
Really?
it's definitely not a good one.
Oh,
For example, Brent's hat is not high quality, but he thinks it is. So I don't. It's very
oh,
subjective.
higher quality than that shirt you're wearing, because we all know the Warriors are going to win tonight. Anyway,
All right.
so first of all, that's a terrible acronym or whatever that trust PID. Who wants to say
Maybe,
that? That's
maybe it's a
awful.
European term.
I don't care what it is. I don't want to. I don't want to say it. But what's worse, the ISPs or the VPNs? I mean,
Basically the same thing, right?
yeah,
Because the VPN is just masking what the ISP would normally do on its own. So,
yeah. And then there's the ISPs that are or the VPNs that are buying ISP, whatever. Um, that last sentence about there's no way to get around this. There's no way to hide or mask. That's awful. I mean, forget any there's not even a veil of privacy in terms of this. They're just saying, look, you're just going to give up the IP address, and there's no way for you to get around it. And then we will be able to take that information and do whatever the hell we want. Because quite honestly, when you have that level of information, like you were saying, Tejas, you can piece everything else together about a person, what they do, when they do, where they're going, how often they go, and we all know that's the information that every digital advertiser craves. So guess what they're going to do with that information? The data brokers are already putting in their bids. So it's this is frustrating. This one is like, okay, I was talking to Annika a little earlier. It almost feels like, we've had that conversation about, wanting a dumb TV. We're getting to the point where we're going to want a dumb phone again. I mean, because at least, if with the smartphone, it's so smart that it's going to give all your stuff out and there's no way around it. And so I don't know, this is really troubling. I totally agree with you. It would make me not want to use their service if I were over there in Europe.
do you have
Yeah,
options?
we have
Might not have options.
iPigeon, which is going to be released on Monday. We'll hear about it.
iPigeon.
It's like carrier pigeons. Going back, way back.
A lot of trackers too, I'm sure.
I wanted to kind of tie in something that Raju has been talking about, which is this privacy has a business model.
I make one other point about what we just talked about.
Yeah.
All this stuff they're doing, that's aimed at advertisers, not their customers. I mean, when was that switch made? Is it years ago? I mean, you used to think your carrier is their main, job and thrust was to provide you a good service for, a good experience, not to pave the way for ads to be able to be used and your data to be, leveraged in ways that were unimaginable. When did this switch happen? Because this is not a little thing here. What they are talking specifically about advertisers. They're talking about being able to provide a certain level of information. I know, maybe the veil is, oh, this is going to create a better service. That's not really what I'm getting when I think of what's going on here.
I mean, remember that article we talked about a while back about the Vizio for TVs, where they were making more money off of advertisements than they were the actual TV unit sales themselves. And so why go through the hassle of having a factory that builds TVs when you can just make more money by selling data? The TVs are just kind of a means to an end in order to get into the data game. So I don't think these guys are the first. They're probably just copying other people.
Exactly. Yeah. Like in one part of the article, it says there's a quote unquote problem. Again, we've talked about this, a problem for who that arises for internet subscribers is that the quote unquote free parts of the internet are threatened again, from whose point of view, by stricter cookie blocking and privacy boosting. They call it schemes. They literally use the word schemes. Like someone trying to protect my data is not a scheme. Maybe it's a scheme to someone who's trying to profit off of my data, but this is your business model problem. This is not my problem that, as a consumer, that I'm like trying to have my data protected. So no, it's not free, first of all, because you're already like, I don't know, taking this information that I didn't consent to you taking, or maybe I have no other choice but to consent to you taking. So I think it goes back to what we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks of this privacy has a business model problem that Raju was speaking on. So irritating.
Yeah, I mean, this one's going to be bad. I'm kind of surprised that they tested it out in Germany of all places too. I thought Germany was a little bit stricter in terms of these kinds of things. But I mean, yeah, I guess right now it's still kind of a proposed state. So we'll kind of see where it goes and how it ends up happening. I'm sure there'll be a follow-up article shortly on it. But speaking of kind of just like the idea of regulation and stuff like that, overall, there was another article that came out from Adweek that was about IAB Tech Lab is building a universal framework for domestic and global privacy laws. And so basically they talk about how they want to create this kind of unified system where, all of your consent and preferences are stored universally rather than from each provider. And then, you'd have more control over it. The problem with these kinds of ideas is, one, getting buy-in from other people. Everybody wants that data on their own. Two, there's got to be some skin in the game for the agencies themselves or the ad marketplaces that actually are controlling these kinds of preferences and data that's being collected. They don't want to give that up. So I think it's ambitious. I'm not quite sure the feasibility of it. Did you guys kind of see another angle from the article, or what do you guys think?
I saw 1919 Versailles, which I know sounds kind of stupid, but this is directly after the war, after World War One, and all the countries got together to try to figure out where to go next. What to do with the losers of the war, and how to splice up and cut up all the land and who gets what. And they were going to do the League of Nations. Well, actually, they did do the League of Nations, which was Woodrow Wilson's, our president at the time. But funny thing about that, all these other companies agreed to that, except for the United States, which is kind of interesting. But I just feel like that, of course, I'm kind of having a little bit of fun here, but it really does feel like there is a lot at stake as this data becomes more and more digital, and companies, not only countries but companies, individuals, trying to figure out how to gain from this the digitization of data. It becomes even, I think it becomes even more difficult to try to figure out as more data goes digital and becomes available and people figure out different ways to use it. It just becomes even harder, I think, for a global digital privacy policy to really be enacted, because it just takes one no or one little opening, and 99% of the other folks that are dependent on that little 1% that says no or lets it go, and it all falls apart. I think it's good intentions, and maybe I'm not thinking big enough about how this could really come together, or maybe I'm too jaded in thinking it could come together. I would love for it to come together, but I find it very difficult to get more and more people from multiple countries on board with doing something.
Yeah, there was one bit at the end of the article that basically said it'll also help publishers evade privacy risks by providing its CMPs in one place where they gather preferences from users. This preference is then collected and pushed globally across all platforms and channels, making it interoperable and for consent management providers to operate. So basically, maybe the idea is that for some players in the market that they would they basically minimize whatever risk that they would have in terms of getting caught with doing something incorrectly, because they're kind of pushing this responsibility off to another party. I'd argue that, kind of going back to Brent's wild League of Nations example, if ultimately if the biggest players in the game aren't really involved in this, then it won't really make a difference. And so you have to have the buy-in from the biggest ones in order for the smallest ones to really have a chance at surviving. So wishful thinking, I think, but I'm not quite sure how far this really goes. But I guess at the end of the day, you can't knock the effort, and at least something is being done and efforts being made. So hopefully it works out for them. I just probably want to learn more and see how it kind of evolves over time.
Yeah, I think the selling point for those people who, or the companies rather, that would need to buy into this, the selling point for them is because there are so many different compliancy laws, especially somewhere as big as the US, state by state. It's hey, we're going to streamline this for you as a way that this will help your bottom line, because you don't have to hire all these people to research all these things and blah, blah, blah. We're just going to make it easy for you. So ultimately, down the line, it does help consumers, but maybe that's their pitch for these larger companies that will have to, basically green light this and able to get it off the ground. So we'll see.
Interesting to see. By the way, if the Rams were around, I'm sure they would have been the team for the League of Nations. Just to let you know that, Tejas.
Yeah, well, I mean, after they left St. Louis for LA with no sense of loyalty, I'm not quite sure how valuable they would be. But anyways, always a comeback, Brent. The next one is about Tim Hortons. And so if anyone doesn't know what Tim Hortons is, it's a pretty big chain. I'd say kind of like Canadian version of Starbucks, basically. They have like coffee and donuts and sandwiches and wraps and things like that. A bunch of stores pretty much based out of Canada, expanded a lot in Europe because basically they didn't want to compete with Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts in the States. And so they've got themselves an app, obviously, to order and do whatever with for their customers. And the article basically says that Tim Hortons app violated privacy laws and collection of vast amounts of sensitive location data. People who downloaded the app had their movements tracked and recorded every few minutes of every day, even when the app was not open, in violation of Canadian privacy laws. And based on a joint investigation from some authorities here. But really, I think the crux of it is kind of this next quote that they got there. But basically, the app asked for permissions to access the mobile device's geolocation functions, misled users into believing the information would only be accessed when the app was in use, like kind of like finding like your nearest Tim Hortons location. Instead, it was tracking you the entire time, everywhere you were going. And basically, you would naturally know where you lived, where you worked, where you were traveling. It also generated an event every time a user entered or left a Tim Hortons competitor, sports venue, their home, workplace. So anything and everything that basically could do. And yeah, I mean, I'd say they were basically told you got to cut it out. But you know, this went on for quite some time already. And even after they got caught with this, I think there was another thing about how basically they ended up going to some US-based data location providers and collecting information from there. And so not a good look for Tim Hortons overall in this. Tim Hortons also, I think, owns Burger King, if I'm not mistaken.
Really?
There's like this weird, yeah, I'm pretty sure they own Burger King. There was some weird side story about that. Apparently there was some story about like Burger King trying to evade taxes in the States by selling to like a foreign entity or something like that. I don't know, but this isn't a tax show, it's a privacy show. So what do you guys think about the tracking of location data from these store apps?
You know what I started as you were going through that unfortunate litany of data that are being collected. I started thinking, you know, if you work for a big company, let's say you work for a company with like 10,000 employees or something like that, or more, and you're working remotely. You maybe you have an app on your phone that your company needs you to have, you know, for I don't know, you get paid or to track your time or whatever, but it's on your phone. So that means it's on all 10,000 employees' phones, let's say. And and it's collecting data like crazy, like this Tim Hortons thing. Are we getting to a point, or will we start seeing like, I'll just say Tim Horton has 10,000 employees just to, make it easy. And are we getting to the point where the actual your employee, I mean your employer, is going to start feeding you ads and selling your data to brokers, and worrying about how to monetize this data in a way, because now that'll give them additional revenue, and that will create more opportunities for shareholder growth. And are we are is this already going on or anything? Because I'm starting to wonder, as these big companies with thousands of employees, are they starting to see this as an opportunity to make even more off of their employees beyond what they do for their living? Because it just feels like it's getting to the point where it's so easy to cross that little line. Okay, well, we can make our quarter if we do this little thing right here. It just feels like stories like this makes my head start to wonder what's going on next with this.
Yeah, I was thinking about this too, just because, Tim Hortons is a huge brand, and I'm sure that this happens on like a smaller scale pretty often. It just doesn't get the same media attention. So, yeah, unfortunately, I mean, I just wouldn't be surprised, I guess, if it, turned into something with like employee surveillance and things like that.
And look at all the stuff they're tracking.
I mean, yeah. So like that part about getting information afterwards. So it says that While Tim Horton stopped continually tracking users' location in 2020, after the investigation was launched, that decision did not eliminate the risk of surveillance. The investigation found that Tim Horton's contract with an American third-party location services supplier contained language so vague and permissive that it would have allowed the company to sell de-identified location data for its own purposes. And so, I mean, de-identified data, already we know we can identify it pretty easily, so that doesn't really mean much, but just another channel. And I think what Annika said is right. I mean, I feel like every store, every restaurant, every shop is trying to get an app out there nowadays, built some kind of reward programs in the name of either marketing or customer loyalty or CX or whatever you want to call it. But a lot of these apps are pretty bad apps. I mean, remember we talked about that Papa John story a while back, Papa John's or Domino's, one of the pizza places where if you opt out of like being tracked, you had to you only get opted out of that device that you requested, and you have to send an email.
I think it's Domino's.
Domino's, right? Yeah. So, and that's, I mean, these are big companies like Tim Hortons and Domino's. So, on one hand, I kind of think smaller players aren't smart enough or sophisticated enough to get into this whole data side game, and then bigger companies are because of maybe shareholder pressure or finding ways to increase the revenue base. So maybe larger companies are bigger, nefarious actors in the situation. And so it's hard to tell which one is which, but ultimately, I think companies like this, the bigger ones especially, I mean, we talked about McDonald's a couple of weeks ago or months ago, maybe, about that, they were tracking your voice in the drive-through. Tim Hortons here, these are some of the biggest vendors in the world, right? I mean, up next, I'm sure if someone dug into other popular restaurant or store, privacy policies and figured it out, you'd probably see some shady language somewhere in there that is tracking a lot of information, right? And all these stores, especially restaurant applications, every single one picks your location, right? Because everyone wants to know what's your nearest, location to you, whether it's a McDonald's app or Tim Hortons or whatever, and then making sure that, luckily, if you select the right permission when you launch the app for the first time, but I'm sure a lot of people just kind of tap always allow just to make it easy. And, whenever you drive by McDonald's, you'll get a notification for large fries for $1 or whatever it is, that promo they're running, right? But these types of things are all pretty sophisticated that larger players, I think, are working on building out a lot more than maybe smaller players aren't quite yet, which is worse because the bigger players have the budgets and the technical sophistication to actually execute all these things.
They're already doing that. Their customers, if you got hundreds of thousands, millions of customers, you probably have, chances are you also have a significant amount of employees. It's like you could segment, all right, we're gonna start, the nefarious activities, as Tay just said. Maybe we'll start with this customer segment. Well, maybe we should experiment on our own employees. We'll see how that works. Let's see what, because we're already tracking them too, to a certain extent. I'm starting to get nauseated now thinking about what may already be going on that we don't even know about. These things are starting to, get identified and found out, but I think we're at the tip of the iceberg, and customers and employees may be in the same boat here.
Yeah, I mean, luckily Tim Hortons is a Canadian company where Canada actually went after these guys, but in the US, no one's going after these guys. So it's a whole different thing out here.
Yeah, just to put a positive spin on things, it's the fact that people are even talking about this at all, and it's even has an article about it. That's just the first step to people becoming more aware and then pushing for, I don't know what the solution is, maybe more regulation, or at least just knowing how to navigate certain pages on on their phones and whatever. Maybe this is just the first step, is first you have to uncover all the ickiness and then you can start to solve it. So that's my positive spin.
We need that. We need a little positivity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the next story I thought was a little on the interesting side too. Basically, there was this survey, not a lot of depth to this article in general, but overall it just said, 50%, 1 in 2 Indians seeing ads based on private phone conversations based on a survey. And so in general, I would say from my experience, even going into India and other countries, especially in more developing countries, you get a lot of kind of text spam in general, and even phone call spam. Phone numbers are pretty much required no matter what. Even if I go to India and I go to like Domino's across from the office for lunch one day, you can't, before the guy even says hello to you, the first thing is phone number. Like that's how everything is based off of your phone number, because you'll get like what do you call it, two-factor authentication SMSs to your phone number, so they know that that's you yourself, and every identification is happening based on phone numbers. And so what this survey kind of goes through is a little bit about just kind of how what do you call it? Where'd this thing go on the screen? It just disappeared there. You know, it said 53% of citizens said they've had one or more instances in the last 12 months where they saw advertisements on the web or app based on their phone conversations. And so I've seen two sides of the story. I mean, people always say that like Facebook and Instagram and whatever else is listening to you on your phone, and then you talk about something with your friends, and then you see an ad for it the next day. And then there's, you know, debating facts if that's even true or not. There's a couple of different studies where it's just like a psychological thing where you're talking about something and magically get an ad. That doesn't mean that they're listening to you. You might have done something subconsciously that triggered that ad or that targeting, which really just kind of proves, I think, the effectiveness of the targeting itself, because you assume that they're not listening to the conversation itself, which could be the case. But, you know, if you say best case scenario, they're not listening to the conversation, but based on all of your other actions that you're doing, they're able to infer what we're going to talk about essentially in the future, and then show you ads based on that. And so I don't think these people are crazy, but the survey itself, I think, just lacked a lot of depth. There wasn't really a lot of, I don't think, scientific merit behind it, at least not that I saw from this article or any of the other ones on the topic. So it might be just kind of chalk it up to kind of not sensationalization, but just hearsay from these folks. But I don't think they're off, but it's just not really that much there. Did you guys see anything else out of this one, or?
No, I agree with you. I think it'd have to be just like a study with more sources that actually outlines the methods or whatever, because they basically just asked the people like, hey, do you think this has happened to you? And they said, yeah. Like everyone would say, yeah. I feel like everyone has had something like that happen, but it's not saying exactly like, you know, we saw this for a fact. It's just like, hey, do you think this is happening? And they're like, yeah, I do think this is happening. So,
Yep.
Oh, and I'm just gonna go back to that Tim Horton story, because I just popped up. I was searching for something, and basically in 2018, Burger King encouraged people to download the app and order discounted Whoppers when in the vicinity of a McDonald's. And nobody really thinks much of it, but there's a whole like press release from Burger King on this. But basically, I'll just read the first paragraph for you. Today, Burger King brand is turning more than 14,000 McDonald's into Burger King restaurants. For a limited time, when you go within 600 feet of a McDonald's restaurant, you can order a flame-grilled Whopper for only a penny on the newly revamped BK app, what we call the Whopper Detour. I like the name, but it's basically, you obviously have to download the app, give it location preferences, and yeah, you might sell a Whopper for a penny instead of whatever the normal cost of a Whopper is. But now they've got you and location data. It's a pretty low customer acquisition cost in general for that. So people wouldn't really realize what's happening in the background or all around tracking and all that. But, you know, small price to pay for ultimately a pretty big data invasion. Yeah. Well, I guess Burger King and Tim Hortons were a match made in heaven. Let's see. Our big story of the week, though, was this article that I thought was pretty solid. Came out just yesterday, but it was the race to hide your voice. Voice recognition and data collection have boomed in recent years. Researchers are figuring out how to protect your privacy. And so, you know, we've talked about kind of voice prints and voice recognition tracking from Alexa to Siri and things like that in the past, but this is kind of a little bit at a broader scale beyond just kind of the typical bad actors that we kind of assume for. But basically it says that additional pieces of information help build a more complete profile that'll be used for all sorts of targeted advertisements, as well as your voice data potentially feeding into a vast realm of data used to show you online ads. There's also the risk that hackers can access the location where your voice data is stored and use it to impersonate you. You know, there's a lot of things around deepfakes and stuff like that. A small number of these cloning incidents have already happened, proving value that your voice holds. A simple robocall scams have also recorded people saying yes to use confirmation in payment scams. And so there was another thing in this article that I liked. Where'd it go? But while I find that, I'll let you guys go off on what you thought about this.
Once again, it's, you know, because of what Siri and Alexa, yeah, we didn't think about the voice being data before the last couple of years, but just how what's seemingly incredibly important or potentially important that data could be to people, in a good way, and as we're seeing in kind of negative ways, because it's once you get your voice, you start recording people's voices and using it against them. Now you see the deep fakes. We think about that from a video perspective, but if somebody is able to you know take your voice and it's your authentic voice and then do some hocus pocus and have you saying things, or at least your voice saying things that you would never say, that to me it's actually maybe even scarier, because you want to believe your ears when you hear the voice, and it's a voice that's recognizable, because then you're able to act on it, because you kind of feel, okay, that is that person's voice, that is who I'm talking to, that is what they want. And but if you can't trust, well, you can't, but it's even going to be worse going further in. It becomes weaponizable even more so than just the text-based shenanigans that go on. And I think it's really going to be, going forward, it's going to be harder and harder to safeguard your voice data, because we there are more and more things for us to talk into, that digitizes and records what we say. This one I think is really troubling. Out of all the things that we've talked about, I'm really, this one kind of makes me shudder even more.
But don't you feel better when they say that the call is being recorded for quality assurances?
No, I never
I
thought.
find the
You know
paragraph
what? I
reference
didn't think about it. I didn't think about that a couple of years ago. I was like, all right, that makes sense. You're gonna use that to get make your service better.
nah, that's not what
Nah.
happened. Uh, but I was just looking. So, opening paragraph here basically says that your voice reveals more about you than you realize. To the human ear, your voice can instantly give away your mood, for example, tell if you're excited or upset. Machines can learn a lot more, inferring your age, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, health conditions, and beyond. Research have been able to generate images of faces based on information contained in individual voice data. And so, as machines become better understanding you through your voice, companies are cashing in. Voice recognition systems from Siri to Alexa, to those using your voice as your password, have proliferated in recent years as AI and ML have unlocked the ability to understand not just what you are saying, but who you are. And basically, there's a lot of services like this. I think even banks and some airlines and stuff. When you call in, you just say your name and they like identify you. Like that's what it is. I think Chase does that for phone support, to authenticate yourself. And so, yeah, like you can't really. I guess the voice is something you can't really do. And the article kind of goes into a lot. I definitely suggest reading this one for folks listening. But it also talks about how you can have like those typical voice disguising machines, but then those are easily like reverse engineerable, so it's not that bad. And then trying to like de-identify a voice is like extremely hard apparently, and so there's not really much there. And so it's kind of right now I think the Wild West in terms of what happens, because at least facial recognition I think is in the conversation for some folks, especially with Brent's favorite company Clearview, but voice data is not really even being talked about quite yet. And I think it probably should be, because ultimately I'd say just as easy it is to get someone's picture, it's also easy to hear them talk and record them on any device, right? I mean, from any app. I mean, there's also this thing about what do you call TikTok last year updated its privacy policies and started collecting what's called voice prints and face prints. And so basically, they obviously own everything about you already. It's nice that they put it in the privacy policy. Probably had to, but they're obviously, I'm sure, doing whatever they can to analyze that data and not just collecting it for no good reason. But yeah, there's a lot behind voice recognition and voice tracking and what can be inferred from that data. And some of it could be maybe used for good. Who knows? But chances are probably not. And I think the problem is a lot of people think of it in the narrow sense of, if someone's able to capture some of these attributes about my voice, will I get like a targeted ad based on that? And I think so many people are fixated on targeted ads as being the only thing that you're going to see, or the only effect of any kind of surveillance that happens. But ultimately, imagine you're you call State Farm and you say, hey, I need like insurance or whatever, and they start analyzing your voice and they realize something is wrong with you just off of that. Some would make the argument that, if you don't disclose something, you're hiding it. But some would make the argument that maybe you didn't even know you had a problem and they found out about it or miscategorized it based on, some sort of analysis that they did. So it can go in a lot of different directions. And I think, it should just be emphasized that targeted ads is not the only effect of this kind of surveillance stuff that we've been talking about. It's definitely far-reaching, and it could be a lot of other worse things that we just don't know about yet. I mean, we didn't really think targeted ads were going to be a bad thing. A lot of people still think they're good things, but I'm not sure if the means justify the end. Anyways, go ahead. What do you guys think?
Yeah, something that you said stuck out to me, especially when you're talking about like if you call into like an insurance company to get insurance or something, it's like the same thing if you're going to try to get some sort of line of credit, like for a mortgage. We've already seen that there are certain lenders and things that their technology does have implicit bias that is amplified through their technology. And, it's just scary to see something like that could become very well a reality when someone hears a voice or a robot hears a voice and there's some sort of implicit bias there of something that's like perceived to be wrong, even though, it's not wrong, it's a bias. Like, I agree with you. I think the implications are far reaching and, I think the researchers in this article are trying to like, that's not what they're trying to do at all. But the fact that like things can be reverse engineered, or other companies are probably doing the same thing for reasons that have to do with like fattening their bottom lines or whatever, or what have you. We'll see what happens. What do you think, Brent?
Yeah, no, I have nothing to add. I mean, it is what it is. I don't know any other way to put it. I have been a kind of an advocate of using the A word. I used to say Alexa more, but I seem to be seeing the A word in Siri, and the potential good of being able to speak to your business applications. But the more you think about it, the more you talk, the more you tell about yourself, and way more than if you type it than if you say it, because everything is analyzable now. I mean, like Tejas, they're saying that they can tell how you look just from hearing you. I mean, it's kind of hard to do if you're texting something, but if you're talking and they're building the capability to say, well, this guy sounds like he's a dude that's over 50, but he probably got a beard. It's probably got
bad choice in sports teams. Who knows? We can figure it all out.
I mean, that's pretty. I don't necessarily think that's a positive, and that positive if you're somebody who wants to control the amount of information that you provide during your interactions. I type, hi, I'm Brent, and they can pick up. But if I say hi, I'm Brent, the exponentially more amount of information they can get from me is pretty frightening at this point. So I think you gotta. We talk about data privacy. It gets even more urgent, I think, when you start thinking of your voice and your face as being data.
Yeah, I think we talked about this last summer, if I remember too. But there was this thing on, I'm pretty sure on Spotify, where if they launched like this, like voice search kind of thing on Spotify, and what Spotify was doing is based on like your tone of voice and everything they could interpret from that, as well as like background sounds and noises you were having going on. They would suggest music and playlists and things based on like your mood and stuff like that. And so ultimately, imagine like you're, I don't know, at a pool and like it's kind of loud and they can tell like what the ambient sound is like and what your voice is like. And if people are in the background, maybe it's more like party, upbeat kind of music. Or if you're at home and like there's, a lot of echo because you're in a small room or something like that, then they might suggest a different kind of music. You pair that with like your phone moving around or like, based on gyroscope movement and stuff like that, you can infer and put a bunch of these different attributes that are normally separate together and kind of build a profile on somebody. It's not the hardest thing in the world to do. And so, that's an example of a company doing it. Here, the article talks a little bit more on a broader scale, but I think the Spotify is an example of a real life use case actually that they patented that they were trying to push forward. And then there were some like musicians and advocacy groups that were trying to go against it. But just basically seeing that type of activity in the open. Ooh. Anyone else got anything else on this, or are we wrapped?
I'm ready to wrap. Let's start rapping.
Yeah.
I will say after Brent got a few close-ups, I do have to give a compliment. As much as I hate it, that is a pretty nice hat. I'm not gonna lie, that it's probably the best hat I've seen you wear. So I will give you credit for that, but that's pretty much the extent of it.
Very nice.
America's.
But anyways, we will wrap with our normal pitches. Follow us on Twitter, Watching Privacy, on YouTube, like, share, subscribe, that whole kind of stuff. And we'll be back next week, probably, hopefully, episode 10, double digits for season 2. And we'll see where we go from there. But adios, guys. Have a good day.
Bye.